presence, and we also appreciate the presence of those of you who are listening via audio. So as we jump into our panel, I'd like to introduce you to our moderator, Nisha Singh. She is a senior program director at the SEEP Network, and currently she works with members to conceptualize and implement learning initiatives for economic strengthening for the ultra-poor, such as savings groups, youth, and pro-poor market development. And without further ado, I'll pass the mic on to Nisha so she can introduce you to our panelists, and we can get on with a great discussion about the report. Thank you.
Thanks, Camille. As Camille said, my name is Nisha and I'm with the SEEP Network, and I won't take too much time. I'll start with introducing our panelists. I'll start on my extreme left with Sadna Samaranayake, who's with BRAC USA. She's the program manager for the Ultra Poor Graduation Program, where she works to advance awareness and implementation of the graduation approach. Prior to working with BRAC, she's worked on affordable housing microfinance, and market-based solutions to extreme poverty. So, welcome, Sadna. Next to her, we have Aaron Dibner-Dunlap. He joined the Innovations for Poverty Action in 2010 as a project coordinator for a study on the impact assessment of savings account. He currently works on a global replication program, testing the effectiveness of SMS messaging as in nudging savings deposits and repayment of credit. So, welcome, Aaron. Next to Aaron, we have Priya Jaisinghani, Senior Advisor to the Administrator and Director of Digital Development at USAID. She leads the agency's efforts to leverage communications technology to dramatically enhance their efforts in dealing with extreme poverty. She's led the agency's conceptualization of the Better Than Cash Alliance and other multi-stakeholder partnerships. She works in a variety of contexts and was also involved initially in the Feed the Future initiative to address undernutrition and food security around the world. So welcome, Priya. And right next to me, we have Larry Reed, who is currently the director of the Microcredit Summit campaign. He has about 25 years of experience in microfinance, doing multiple things, including designing, supporting, leading activities of organizations that empower poor. I think Larry's longest stint was with Opportunity International as the CEO of the Opportunity International Network. And I think it's a rite of passage now in microfinance to have worked with Larry at some point. So with that, I'll pass it on to Larry to talk about the report and give us some of the highlights.
Thank you very much, Nisha, and thank you to panelists for joining us. It's great to have you as part of our discussion. Let me put this in here and see if you still hear me. Can I do that? All right. So the State of the Campaign report we do every year, and I'll show you, this is what it looks like. On the website, I encourage you to go there to look through the whole report, but it involves, we have a database of over 3,700 microfinance institutions around the world that we check in with to hear about what they're doing and get numbers from. We follow up extensively with about 200 of those this year. And then all of that data then gets verified by outside verifiers, someone who knows the organization and can speak to whether or not the numbers they're giving us are credible. And so that's the basis for this report. This year it also includes a lot from the discussions we had at the summit in Manila that was held last October. So we had lots of great speakers there, and we did follow-up interviews with many of them. And so a lot of that is sort of a review of what's going on now in the field of working with people in extreme poverty is what we've incorporated into this report. So let me first give a context for the report, a broader overview of what's happening in the world of development. Sort of the big news lately is people are talking about getting to zero, which is getting to zero people in extreme poverty in the world. This graph that you see here is the Brookings Institution did a review of poverty rates and then saw what was the possibility of actually getting to the zero level by the year 2030, which is the date that the World Bank has set as a target date for getting rid of extreme poverty. And what they show is that there's a range of options. If the trend line that they expected comes in at about 10% poverty in the world, with good response, more work done, it could get down to the zero level or close to it. Things going against us, and it may level off the poverty level. Now, just putting this in context, remember, many of us grew up, well, I'm older than most of you here, but many of us grew up at a time where people expected poverty would always be something we had to deal with, and extreme poverty was just the way of the world. And as recently as 1990, it was over 40% of the world's population lived on less than $1.25 a day. So we've seen remarkable progress in the past couple of decades. Now let's see then compare that to the numbers we see on total clients in microfinance. Now, because we're the Microcredit Summit campaign, when we count clients, we're counting credit clients. These are borrowers at the end of last year, a total number of borrowers without outstanding loans. And what you see is an overall, the top line is the total number of clients worldwide reported by microfinance institutions. The bottom line is those who were among the poorest in their countries when they received their first loan from the institution they're borrowing from. And what you see in the lines are steady climb upward on both lines until a couple years ago, and then the Andhra Pradesh crisis in India hit, where there was overlending, bad practices in collection and follow-up, state response that drastically cut back the ability of lenders to operate there. About 16 million loans came off the books, and it affected the worldwide totals that we reported last year. This year we see worldwide, most of those losses from last year have been gained back. We're back at around 204 million microfinance borrowers worldwide at the end of 2012. The bottom line, showing those who are among the poorest, shows a continuing decline. So the high mark in 2010 at 138 million, going down to 124 million in 2011, and then 116 million at the end of 2012. So a continuing decline in the poorest. When we looked at that number, then we went back to some of the organizations that reported to us that showed the biggest levels of decline in the number of poorest clients that they were serving, to ask, okay, what happened? Why is this? The major response we got from those organizations was they were no longer willing to claim the big numbers they had claimed before. So back when we started doing this collection in '97, nobody knew how to track people in extreme poverty. The tools have gotten much better over time. As people have employed these tools, they find that they're actually serving less people in extreme poverty than they thought they were. And so those who are using tools to measure the levels of poverty of their clients find that their numbers are less than they were before, what they thought they were reporting before. And so now they're reporting lower numbers. Also, verifiers looking at numbers reported by institutions who know the trend line with what's happening with using tools and measurement are no longer willing to verify the high percentages. And so what we're getting back now are lower reported numbers of clients, poorest clients being served, largely because people are using better tools for measuring who they're serving and the poverty levels of their clients. The further analysis we did on one country where they did a lot of work in measuring poverty levels, and then as a network worked on how do we respond to this. You'll see in the Philippines there was a big drop from 2010 to 2011 in numbers of poorest. That's because 10 institutions all agreed to use the PPI at that time. And what they got back was they were serving about 500,000 fewer poorest clients than they thought they were. Over the course of that year and the next, they services that would help address the needs of the poorest clients. And you see the numbers are starting to increase now. So having this knowledge of who you're actually serving and being able to track that, develop appropriate products and services, then means that organizations can reach greater numbers among the poorest. So in this report, what we did was look at what are areas that seem to be working in this client group. Looking at the people amongst the poorest, our goal as a campaign is to see 100 million of the world's poorest move out of extreme poverty. And we saw with the numbers being reported, unless there's a more concentrated effort in that area, we aren't going to reach that goal. And so we started looking at who was having a good impact. And here are some, I'll just briefly highlight a few areas where organizations are reaching the poorest and are being able to show movement over time, results moving out of poverty. And I'm sure Andrew will question me on that later. One is a lot of organizations, when they start using poverty measurement tools, what they find very soon is clients may not be moving out of poverty, and one of the chief factors is health. If someone gets sick in the family, if the person with the business gets sick, they can no longer operate the business. If a family member gets sick, they take all their savings and accumulated money and invest it in health care, and the business suffers. And so many organizations are starting out to look at how they can help in the health needs of their clients, either by delivering health education, health finances, or health products. And this largely happens with group lending systems and groups coming together and being able to deliver these other health products with them. In the campaign, we're working with Freedom from Hunger in the Health and Microfinance Alliance in promoting good tools for integrating health and microfinance. Another area that is working well, you see Jollibee there. This is creating value chains that actually reach to the very poorest. And this is something, an example from the Philippines, where the National Livelihood Development Corporation worked with some of the major food chains in the country to get them to source from local producers and small-scale producers in the country. In this example, Jollibee, which is the largest hamburger chain in the country, used to get all of its onions from Japan. And they didn't buy locally because it would just cost them too much to organize all the different small-scale growers. But working through microfinance institutions in the country, they organized the growers and then supplied loans for them to start growing these onions. And Jollibee purchased them. The National Livelihood Development Corporation worked on other pieces of the value chain, like storage units, that help get the products to the restaurant in good shape. So these are one example. These have been done in many parts of the world, this idea of extending value chains. The largest number of people living in extreme poverty live in rural areas, and the largest proportion of those get their income from agriculture in some way. And so if we can extend the value chain to include them, then we provide more opportunities for people in extreme poverty to move out. Digital services, and we'll hear from USAID a little more about digital services. The idea of digitizing basic financial services, being able to transact money over mobile phones, get messages over mobile phones, means that distance no longer has a high cost. And so you can afford to provide services in much more remote areas, much more cost effectively. Now the interesting thing about digital, often we assume it's digital or personal, but that's not really true. It's how does digital interact with personal to make the system work. And when you're working with people in extreme poverty, you still need good aggregation points to bring together enough people to make the service cost effective. And one example that we highlight in the report is the program with savings groups, where savings groups are connecting with financial institutions to provide additional savings services, but then transacting a lot of the work over digital phones and actually digitizing some of the training for savings groups and being able to spread it that much more quickly. setting up a system where banks can afford to operate in small population areas and remote areas is very important. And developing agent banking, where you don't need to have a big safe and bulletproof windows and everything to carry out basic banking transactions. That's another way to get services to people in extreme poverty. These are often linked in with digital forms as well. But setting up banks that can work in remote areas, sometimes the agents are NGOs or microfinance institutions that transact on behalf of the bank. But setting up a regulatory environment that promotes agent banking then allows financial services to get out farther and to people at lower incomes. One area that's actually been researched well and is showing some promise is this whole area of graduation programs for the ultra poor. Sadna will talk more about that. And there's a growing movement to link these programs to cash transfer programs done by governments for social protection for helping those in extreme poverty. So linking the stability factor that cash payments, cash transfers can give to a poor family, linking those to graduation efforts to help movement out of poverty over time, linking it to savings accounts and to education and livelihood development actually has shown great promise in helping people develop the tools to move their families out of poverty. One thing we saw is that working for people in extreme poverty requires commitment, requires a desire to know what's working at that level, to measure poverty levels, and to look at changes over time to develop and advance and change programs so that they serve this client base well. And at the summit in Manila, we started this process of asking organizations, whether they be microfinance organizations or banks or phone companies or central banks, what commitment could they make to reaching to the very poorest in their countries? What could they do, whether it's setting up a mobile payment system that works for the very poor, or developing graduation programs, or expanding savings groups. But we had at the summit, 17 organizations made commitments there. We're now up to about 25 organizations, including UN groups, central banks, as well as a number of microfinance and other groups, and we're working on a few banking institutions as well. So working in this area requires focus and commitment, and our role as the summit will be to continue building those commitments and helping people learn from what each other's doing. The theme of this year's report is resilience, and it comes from a trip I made to, after the summit, we had the summit in October in the Philippines. Then I went back in January, in between Typhoon Yolanda hit the Philippines and just wiped out a major swath of the country. This picture is from Tacloban, and you see a little circle on the picture. That area, not the building that's still hanging on there, that one actually got torn down later, and then this whole area got cleaned up. But I was there 75 days after the typhoon went through, and we held a center meeting in a house that had been rebuilt by clients of Card Bank in the Philippines. And what I was struck with there is how much an organization can do to build resilience, to foster recovery when it's focused on people in extreme poverty and its focus is helping them regardless of their situation. Card Bank, I talked with the regional manager after the typhoon. He took a plane, a boat, a car, a motorcycle, and then walked the last 10 kilometers into Tacloban carrying 2 50-kilo sacks of rice to help first find all the staff who were living there, what had happened to them, and then find all the clients. They identified who was there. Then Card from Manila started sending in cars with suitcases full of cash because all the cash was gone in Tacloban. It was either locked up in the banks or it had blown in the wind. And so they brought in the cash, they started paying out. They had life insurance and medical insurance for their clients, and they have a system of payment in 1, 3, or 5 days, and they immediately began implementing those policies and began paying out claims. And then they set up relief loans for people to get back on their feet. And at this meeting, they were actually discussing some of these relief loans, and the clients, after a lot of questions, came away saying, okay, we like these loans, but we'd rather you call them rebuilding loans. We don't want to feel like victims here. And as I walked around the neighborhood, their sorry stores were back open. They were conducting business again. Now, it was because a lot of different relief efforts had gone into that area, and there was a cash for work program that helped get the economy jump-started. But then groups like CARD and other microfinance institutions were there to help clients get back on their feet. And what I was struck with was 75 days later, I mean, it's still a mess, and they're still dealing with huge losses, but they were functioning. They were starting back again. And what struck me is living in extreme poverty is a position of such vulnerability that outside forces you don't control, can push you back into poverty, can keep you from moving out, and yet institutions that provide financial services that really have the needs of their clients at heart can provide a buffer and help people get back on their feet, help foster the resilience that enables them to withstand those shocks and to, over time, move their families out of poverty. So that's what the report's about, and we'll hear from people who have read it and want to comment and let us know what they think about it. So Nisha, I'll let you ask the questions.
Thank you, Larry. That was very helpful. So I have a few questions for our commentators and panelists, and then hopefully I think that'll spark some discussion amongst the group here, and then we'll open it up to the audience. Erin, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay. So for some of us, the story that Larry just told about, resilience in the Philippines in this particular context, that's enough evidence to show how financial services work and where they play a role in someone's life.
It's enough, right?
Sure.
Yeah, but these anecdotes or stories like this, there's always a need for more evidence, and microfinance is moving more into trying to be more thoughtful about understanding what interventions work and how. So based on the work that IPA has done and looking at all the impact evaluation and research around microfinance and the financial services discussed in this report, can you give us a sense of what are effective, which are better, what the research agenda is looking like now?
Sure. Hi, everyone, and thanks to Larry and the Microcredit Summit campaign for having me. It's an honor. That's a delightfully broad question that I'll be happy to answer in generalities, and I'll try to give some evidence where I can. So first, can I pull up my slide, please? Can you fast forward to slide 4? Should be a map. First, let me just give you an overview of sort of where we are in the thinking of microfinance and a little bit of an indication to where we're headed. But first, it's a little bit important to not to walk out or geek out completely, but it's a little bit important to understand how you even measure whether or not someone is benefiting from having a loan at all. Because obviously, if you approach that one person, that one borrower, it's likely that they'll have some more cash, and those outcomes are going to be particular to that person. Likely, if you only target people who have already, a whole group of people who have already borrowed, that's a self-selected group, right? So you can, we found 2 really good ways to measure whether or not someone is benefiting from microcredit. The first is sort of in a generic image that you see behind me. You can randomize which areas have access to microcredit, and the proxy for that would be opening a microcredit branch in an area, and which don't. But we've been able to do this in a couple of cases. It doesn't happen that often. There aren't these massive expansions of MFIs into 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 areas with relatively little access that often. But one study that was like that was the Compartamos, the one that we did with Compartamos Banco, which is the largest MFI in Mexico, which a few years ago was expanding into the north for the first time. And so Dean Carlin and his co-authors, they got them to agree to randomize which villages and towns received a new branch and which didn't. And so what's impressive about this study is the size of the partner that they were able to work with, and also the scale of the research itself, because a few years later they went back to the areas and they surveyed over 16,000 households, and they measured about 37 types of outcomes to see what had changed in the communities with access to loans or not, whether or not they had access to Compartamos loans. And remember, this is surveying the entire community, so not just borrowers, but also people who didn't borrow. Can I go back to the second slide? Sorry, I'm jumping all around here. This is a really confusing little graphic that the researchers developed, but it nicely summarizes the various outcomes and standardizes them so that we can look at them all on one page. And it's too small to read, but let me just, the general gist is movement to the right, to my left, is a positive movement, is a numerically positive shift, and the movement to the left is a numerically negative shift. So generally, there wasn't a lot of movement on the outcomes, but it was a little bit of a mixed bag. So, for example, outcomes such as salaried jobs or satisfaction with life, those didn't move much, as maybe we wouldn't expect it to. Some of the positive outcomes are unequivocally good. So they reported higher revenues across the whole community, the treatment community. That's pretty good. Revenues were up. The women who received the loans, they participated in more financial decision making in the household. They reported less depression. But there were also those outcomes that could be good or could be bad, depending from a normative perspective, depending on the context. So the groups bought fewer assets, for example. Their income from government programs were down, that sort of thing. So all in all, it's a mixed bag. I'm making you work out here. Go forward to slide 5. So thanks. That's one way that we've measured impact, and another way, when you want to focus on who is actually borrowing, is to work with the institution directly to get them to randomize who actually receives a loan and who does not. The nice part about this kind of study is it's selecting people who are already interested in getting a microfinance loan, so you can more directly measure outcomes on would-be borrowers. So there aren't many institutions who would let us deny a loan to a clearly creditworthy client, or let us give a loan to someone who's clearly not creditworthy. So this is a good system that has been developed, where we take people who are on the margin of creditworthiness, so sort of hovering right around this line above which a client normally receives a loan and below which they don't. And we get them to randomize who actually receives a loan within that marginal group. And so researchers, Dean Carlin and John Dinman, they researched this in the Philippines, and they found that male-owned businesses, they reported increased profits, but fewer employees. So that was a bit of a quandary. They also did this in South Africa, and they reported that both employment and income were up, and 26% of households report an improvement in food consumption, which is great. But they also experienced more stress. So all in all, I guess to summarize, it's sort of a mixed bag with where they are in terms of the impact that microcredit itself has had on both communities and borrowers themselves. What we're seeing, and I think where we agree very resolutely with the report, is that these value-added services that are being added to the traditional microfinance model are really promising. They're things that we both found some evidence of working. I won't go into the details, but also things that we're interested in researching further. So flexible repayment schedules, grace periods, insurance added onto the loan, dispersing and collecting loan payments through digital channels, those sorts of things. Those are really promising avenues that we're still looking into and giving more people access to the right kind of credit product. Thanks.
Thanks, Aaron. That was very helpful. Picking up on his last thought, Priya, I want to turn to you. USAID has been making a lot of investment, we've heard, in digital finance. So can you talk to us a little bit about the opportunity that the agency sees and why this push?
Sure, thank you. Well, first, I just want to say thanks for having me. It's, I started my development career in microfinance, and for the last, I think, 4 years have been really hunkered down working on technology for development writ large. So it's nice to be forced to read the report early and get back to my roots a little bit. And also just wanted to say, in reading it, it just struck me how important your work is in keeping the eye, or our collective eye, on the ball in terms of making sure the very poor are reached. And in my world, we focus so much on the exciting new business models that technology enables that sometimes I fear we forget that we have to be measuring and focus on who's left out. So this was really a great report, and I appreciate being here. I was happy to see that there was emphasis on digital payments and the way in which leveraging mobile networks can be an opportunity to reach the very poor. And as Larry said, the mobile networks and technology more broadly can lower the cost of transactions to enable payments and saving services, and ultimately a range of other financial services for the poor. But I think that's only one piece of the reason USAID is so excited about digital. So I just wanted to elaborate on 3 other aspects which, as I've gotten into the world of digital finance, have really struck me as exciting new developments, not only because of the way in which we can drive down transaction costs for financial inclusion, but first of all, digital payments infrastructure is starting to show an opportunity to create new pay-as-you-go business models. So if you look at across East Africa, for example, where digital payments are really prevalent, we're seeing more and more companies, small companies, develop as a result of being able to collect payments through digital channels. So, for example, water companies are expanding into rural areas because they know they can collect the payments more efficiently. So increasingly we're seeing digital payments not just as a tool for financial services, but really as a way to stitch together a marketplace of actors and create more entrepreneurship, even amongst some of the more remote and poor areas. So pay-as-you-go is one of the kind of big surprises and real exciting parts of digital finance in my mind. The other reason I think digital finance is exciting, and Aaron alluded to this to some extent, is that you're now able to link financial transactions with behavioral nudges. And I don't know if anyone's read the book Nudge years ago, but if you're saving on your phone, or if you're getting a loan and you're paying back on your phone is also the medium through which you can get little messages that say, reminder, Priya, your payment is due, or reminder, Priya, you haven't saved as much today as you did yesterday. Or you can structure your financial product in a way that nudges me read the book Scarcity, or hasn't read it, I strongly encourage you to do so, because I think what it reveals is that when people are very poor and hungry and thirsty and in desperate conditions, they're often making choices that go against their long-term interests just because of need, and therefore this opportunity to nudge people and encourage better behavior is really, I think, a way that we can think collectively about ensuring the impact of microcredit and financial services is consistently high. And then I think the third area that we could elaborate on in terms of the value of digital finance is really the analytics that come out of it. So, I know that if we want to reach the world's poor with financial services, all models need to be competing, and we need to give people a range of services and delivery channels. But the digital delivery channel allows us to analyze people's behaviors and in a way that allows institutions to tailor products more easily. We used to talk about the value, the importance of having a credit score to dictate what types of loans you can get. Now we're talking about transaction scores, which is something that I think is especially relevant for the very poorest. People who aren't maybe eligible for loans are transacting on digital platforms, and through that there's this whole data exhaust around how much money have I spent or received as a remittance, and that now is taking the place of a credit history. A transaction history is getting the poorest more visible and ultimately eligible for a range of financial services. So maybe I'll stop there, but I commend you for acknowledging the digital finance component, and I think there's a lot more to this story, and I think the microfinance community, together we can really figure out how to take what the world of microfinance and microcredit knows and what the world of digital is doing, and put it together and see really, really powerful models of financial inclusion.
Thanks, Priya. That was very helpful. Just moving on, digital finance is a very big part of the discussion within financial inclusion. Another new approach that is gaining a lot of attention is the graduation approach, which was pioneered by BRAC and has now been replicated in multiple countries. So, Sadna, if you could tell us a little bit about what the approach is and what it encompasses and what some of the successes have been.
Sure. Can everyone hear me okay? No? I'll lean in a little bit. Thank you for having me, and like Priya, I wanted to sort of commend the commitment of the Microcredit Summit to sort of refocusing the agenda on the extreme poor and the ultra poor, as BRAC refers to, sort of the lower earning half of people living under the $1.25 a day mark. So just to start, I just wanted to kind of get a bit of a show of hands. How many of you have ever heard of BRAC? Fantastic. Wonderful. Sometimes it's a thin crowd, so we always want to double check. But BRAC has been the largest microfinance institution, or the largest nonprofit in the world in terms of staff size, with an operating budget of roughly around $700 million. More notable than that, most of it is self-financed through revenues. Still not hearing me okay?
Maybe there's some feedback.
How's that? How about now? All right, we'll continue, and maybe, should I take it away? So most notably, so I'm going to continue. Yes, great.
So most notably, a lot of our operating budget is self-financed through revenues that we generate, mostly in microfinance. And I think BRAC came to the realization, after about 30 years of doing microfinance work at scale in Bangladesh, that actually its pro-poor mission was not necessarily exactly well served, and that there was a portion of the population that they were not able to reach with microfinance interventions because these individuals were too poor, too ill, too chronically food insecure, too ostracized in the community to engage in a group where they could procure a loan. And microfinance really sort of assumed some level of latent capacity in order to be able to engage in a micro enterprise that these individuals simply did not have. And BRAC sort of field staff began to realize that disproportionately these individuals sort of living at the margins, invisible in their own communities, were predominantly, disproportionately women and lived in women-led households. And that sort of led them to sort of pioneer this approach that is now known as the graduation model. The full form is challenging the frontiers of poverty reduction, targeting the ultra-poor. It's a mouthful. But it's known as a graduation approach, and what it really is it's really sort of trying to tackle the question that Larry raised earlier, or the observation that extreme poor households live in incredibly tenuous, vulnerable situations where they're really susceptible to so many kinds of shocks. So the approach really is it's a 24-month methodology, and it's been implemented in different parts of the world in as little as 18 months, as long as 36. And it's an approach that sort of targets a whole host of comprehensive interventions at the household. Some are only looking at women as the primary client, and some work with both men and women. First and foremost, the program, maybe if we go to the next slide. So this kind of gives you a little bit of the overview of how it looks. It starts with finding this woman, finding this ultra-poor family within a hamlet, a community, a village, and oftentimes involves a community of also extreme poor people to get together in a PRA, or a community wealth ranking exercise where they actually identify who lives in that community, and the community themselves identify who among them are in the worst positions. That data has been sort of verified and double-checked through household visits and extensive surveys that our staff does. And then almost immediately after that, with a bit of a sense of who this household is and who this client is, program organizers, frontline staff, work with the client to establish what kind of sort of micro-enterprise or livelihood they might be suited or inclined to do. And one of the key things about the intervention that makes it quite different from many others is that we start with providing an asset, to transferring a physical asset to the household. In rural areas, oftentimes that's livestock, a combination of livestock. Sometimes it's the seed and fertilizer, and maybe the money to lease a plot of land to cultivate. Sometimes it's a bundle of goods to start a small petty trade operation. And in places like Bangladesh, half of the cost of the intervention per household is actually the cost of the asset that gets transferred over. In addition to that, there is a consumption stipend that's provided for a brief period of time to help the household or the woman, the target recipient, get a little bit of breathing room, allow her to not go and do her day wage labor job, allow her to figure out how to make a return from this asset that she's been given. And it's also designed to help improve her caloric intake, because we find that a lot of these clients are really just, energy levels are too low, and the tunneling effect is too difficult to overcome otherwise. Another sort of key part of the intervention is that our program officers work with households on a weekly basis, imparting a whole slew of different types of training, hand-holding, coaching, cheerleading. It's a whole set of interventions, and as Larry mentioned earlier, healthcare is one of the biggest sort of sources of shock and setback to households, and so our programs also integrate fairly comprehensive healthcare checkups, preventative health coaching. And then there's another element that we think is also very important to ensure that households have continued sustained graduation outcomes, which is that their social capital, in addition to their skills capital and their physical capital, is increased. And how we do that is we work with the community. Over the course of the 2 years that we're working with households, we're also simultaneously identifying who the village level respected are, who these individuals are that can sort of be pegged to be a support system, to sort of lend a helping hand to graduates once our intervention has left the area. And so our program staff helps to mobilize village poverty reduction committees who meet on a monthly basis and hear issues and grievances and really sort of give some social standing and stature to the families that have graduated, and a lot of these committees end up taking on incredible, powerful social roles within the community at large. So maybe go to the next slide. You're probably wondering, what do we mean when we say a household has graduated? And for us, it's a pretty comprehensive look. These are the indicators that we look at, and if we don't necessarily place, we could say that it's getting someone over a certain income threshold, but that's really, sort of, we think just a one-dimensional way to look at it. We could say that if you've got 3 assets, then you're graduated, but assets, sometimes livestock dies, floods happen, and we don't find those to be incredibly long-term measures. If you look through this list, essentially what we're trying to do is seed outcomes that show some level of resilience in the household. So is there some structural integrity to the household that this person lives in? Are children of school-going age actually going to school? Are there multiple sources of income? Are there assets? Is there maybe a home garden in areas where that's possible to contribute to food security? So all of the indicators and criteria that we're looking at are really sort of geared at trying to measure whether a household has improved its resilience to the many shocks that they will still face after the 24-month graduation period. As Larry alluded to, there have been some good results with the model. I think if we can go to the next slide. We show, so we had a sort of a fairly heavy-duty randomized control trial conducted, and we're doing sort of the follow-on research 6 years on. But we find that, in addition to the statistics that you see up here, which sort of speak to increases in income, sort of 33% increase in earnings within 2 years of these households, and a 38% increase 4 years on. We're looking at 8-fold increases in savings. We're looking at about 15% increase in consumption after 4 years. In addition to these types of results of the treatment group versus the control, what we're also finding is that we see structural changes in the employment choices that these women are now able to make. So whereas before, many of these women, in fact, the vast majority of these women were wage laborers or day laborers working as domestic aides or working in the fields, where oftentimes their compensation was not even cash, but in-kind sort of food, a fistful of rice, if you will, for a day's labor. Now you see a sort of structural shift away from that sort of wage labor and more hours devoted to self-employment, and significant increases in sort of significant declines rather in numbers of participants who sort of only rely on wage labor as their primary income source. So we find that it's a methodology that has legs, and we think it's been well adapted not only by microfinance institutions in different parts of the world, like in Haiti and in India and in Africa and other places, but we also find nonprofits, sort of development sector organizations approaching BRAC and other implementers who have implemented the methodology well to figure out how they can sort of extend the reach of their pro-poor efforts and how they can see more sustainable livelihoods outcomes. And increasingly, as the report notes, we're seeing governments really very interested in sort of looking at graduation as a complement to social protection efforts and figuring out how to sort of tack on these other interventions around cash transfer programs. I think I'll
Sadna. That was very helpful. I do have more questions for you, but I was thinking, it might be a good opportunity if you had questions for Larry, because all of you read the report and you shared some of your thoughts about your work, but I'm sure there's some questions. So maybe Aaron, we'll start with you.
All right, thanks again. Arian, reading the report, which is a really excellent look at the sector as a whole. One thing that I've already mentioned that we're looking towards, and you do a great job of highlighting, is these sort of and it's hinting at an increased portfolio of financial options for the extreme poor, and obviously that's something that we're interested in as well. How do you see these new products that are coming to market and new partnerships? How do you see that changing what's available for the extreme poor and affecting the mix of clientele of MFIs and their organizations?
Yeah, very interesting question, Aaron. Because with our Name the Microcredit Summit campaign, where the name talks about one intervention, but really the poor need access to a wide range of financial services, often tied to other services as well. Not only do poor need access to savings, but many different types of savings. Long-term savings for old age, and then health savings for when someone gets sick or an insurance policy, and then short-term savings so they can restock their business at the end of the week or the month. So what's actually developing is a full range of services being available, but different providers possibly providing different things. So it's going to be interesting, especially Priya, what you talked about with how digital is providing these pay-as-you-go options, and people may be coming in and taking just a piece of that. I think there's going to be a big role for people who have relationships of trust with poor communities to be the bridge between these services and what people need. It's almost like you have, rich people have portfolio managers who work for them. Look at all the different financial tools out there, and based on your age and whether you have children in school or not, and other things, figure out which are the best tools for you to use. I think that's what we're moving to for people at the bottom end as well. But somebody has to help clients understand these tools, how they work for them, the whole designing and developing of the tools, so a client can say, oh yeah, this is going to meet this need I have right now. But what we see is tools that come out that meet needs and are easily understood. So a payment service over the phone that takes off because it's so much better than the option of having to carry the cash to the rural area or get a bus driver to do it for you. That people learn how to adapt. So I see a range of products, niche players in there, maybe financial institutions at the end that have the capacity and the ability to hold on to money and keep it safe and invest it properly. But then people on the ground who can be the bridge to people in poverty to help them see how different tools, what's available to them, how they can use them. Something like savings groups I see as sort of the starting point for a lot of these things, and the introduction point for many different products.
Can I just follow up?
Yeah,
And then are you
please.
seeing a lot of organizations play that role as the bridge, or are they seeing these other commercial partners as competitors?
Well, yeah, I think one of the things, so you have the BRAC model, which is you become the world's largest nonprofit and you can do everything.
Right.
And not
Everyone can do.
right. It's just here's the path to follow. I think there are a lot of institutions that have been making it with credit because you can earn good income on credit that have to start thinking about how do we make our income on transactions instead of on lending? How do we get the phone company or the bank to pay us per transaction to deliver these services in a way, and we become the aggregators for this. But basically, someone else deals with the cash,
for the microfinance thing.
That's right.
I'd like to, when I saw that chart of the 90s up to 2011, I mean, that really does make me think. We talk a lot about how people are trying to graduate, get their kids in school, but what does the next generation involved in microfinance do? Do they literally graduate and never want to come back? Are they somehow involved? I would think they would be a perfect link that you're talking about that skill of knowing the community and yet still
Right.
having to, because there is, as you're talking digital and as you're talking different products, there is a serious skills demand in microfinance that I don't know that was at that kind of premium 10 years ago.
Right, it's a good time for me to talk about our summit that's coming up in Mexico, which is focused on the next generation, September 3 to 5 in Mérida, Mexico. But yeah, one of the things, there are different ways we're going to look at this, but one is that as organizations have become more technological and more commercial, they've also become more male in their leadership. And so one of the sessions we're going to talk about is how do we make sure women are a part of the leadership suite as much as they're a part of the client base? And how do we make sure that voice continues to be in? Another discussion is on children of clients and what are the products and services that are appropriate for children who may have gotten a good education. And at the last summit, Yunus talked about this, where he said he started a program now in Bangladesh, which is sort of venture capital program for high schoolers, inventing social businesses that they want to do. And he said they'll always come to him and say, but I've got these ideas, but I don't know much about how to run a business. Where do I learn about running a business? And he says, well, you've got someone in your house that's run a business for a long time. You might talk to your mother about this. But then they take the profits that they use from Green Foam and invest that in this venture capital fund to help social businesses. So I think a lot of this looking at how do you not only work with these children who have grown up, many times they become the staff of financial service institutions, because I remember an opportunity, we had someone who we hired who was the executive director whose mother was a microfinance client, and he said, every loan I make, I see my mother. But it's people who have that heart and that knowledge of the community, but also have had the chance to learn other skills. What about in BRAC? In BRAC, human resources is a huge issue for an organization with that many people. What do you do to build for the next generation? You really have the next generation coming in at BRAC in a literal sense, but what do you do to build the leadership for the future in that organization?
So, in terms of our work and our sort of staffing plan going forward, with the kind of work that we're doing, we are really trying to source individuals to come up through the communities themselves, right? So nobody understands this work better than the children of people who have received loans, right? Who have met with those program officers on a daily basis, who have come up in households who have borrowed for 10, 20, 30 years. And they understand BRAC, as in terms of its ethos and what it's there to do. And oftentimes in the communities, you hear kids say, I want to work, I want to get educated, and I want to be a program officer or a loan officer like sir over there or madam over there. So that's a core part of our sort of ethos on how we look to build those capacities and staff up. And then and we're also really also looking to, as we expand and build operations in different parts of the world, including in Africa, to develop young professionals, people who are coming from the communities, who have a keen sort of awareness of the social issues that permeate their communities, getting them to come and visit BRAC programs in Bangladesh and elsewhere, spend a year in the field to really understand poverty in its different contexts, to develop empathy for different contexts of poverty, and then sort of train them up through the system and have them sort of, have an established career path and plan.
Hi, my name is Cameron Ashkar. My question has a little bit to do with the next generation, but more in the context of when we're talking about the world's most impoverished people, or the bottom million, as a lot of people like to talk about it. And sometimes getting out of poverty is very much synonymous with becoming more of a consumer. Like Sadna mentioned that after 4 years, there's a 15% increase in consumption. My question deals with, I know some of you talked about like some different trainings, and I think Sadna, you mentioned also some different trainings that were articulated with your program. Is there anything that deals with educating people that you're graduating out of poverty into sustainable understandings about how to be better consumers as they graduate into the ability to consume more? Because as we bring more and more people out of poverty, I think that's a real issue that we have to consider is, the way that we consume and making it a sustainable thing. So my question has to do with sustainability, and it's open to anybody who would like to speak on that.
I'll give maybe an unpopular response to that, which is, with many of the organizations that I'm increasingly dealing with that are more on the commercial side, so some of them, the largest banks or mobile operators in a country, I think it's a very hard proposition to suggest that it's their responsibility to, to invest in clients' education beyond financial literacy. So, I always say that finance offers people a choice, but it doesn't guarantee good choices are made. So in my mind, if the world is getting more commercial and more digital, it's really incumbent on governments and civil society and donors to think about perhaps a new set of organizations that work alongside of the bankers and the payments providers to do outreach to those communities. So you're almost divorcing the finance and the education, depending on the willingness, frankly, of the financier.
I can speak a little bit to that too. And it sounds like what you're, or some of the approaches I've seen to creating what you're calling better consumers, and I'm not quite sure what I don't think I have a great idea of what you mean by better, but clearly we've acknowledged that people aren't always making financial decisions in their long-term interest or something like that. So I've seen two different ways tried in the literature, and there are many more, but you could give them training, financial literacy training. And there are many different types that have been tried, attached to loans, just completely independently, that sort of thing. Unfortunately, in the research literature, those trainings themselves have not been found to have much of an effect on financial behavior yet. It could be that we're not taking advantage of the best platforms, that we haven't gotten the curriculum right. But right now, financial literacy trainings don't seem like the way to go. What's more convincing is that there's a lot of researchers now are talking about unconditional cash transfers, or just sort of letting people manage the money themselves. And I'm sure a lot of you are aware of the Give Directly evaluation. For those who don't know, Give Directly is a nonprofit that sends money via M-Pesa directly to recipients in Kenya from donors in the US. And that found promising results. That I believe more durable assets were purchased. People made smart decisions with the money, even though it came with no strings attached. And these weren't small amounts either. So I think you're going to see more of a trend of sort of empowering people to take charge of their own finances and let them as they grow wealthier, keep making decisions for themselves. That's already moving in a positive direction.
I'll take issue with you on this, Priya.
Being provocative.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't totally believe it.
scarcity, which says that all human beings in scarcity have a propensity to make short-term decisions that actually make their long-term options worse. And whether it's me managing my time or a poor person managing their money, that there are ways in which taking care of these short-term issues decreases capability in the future. I guess so that's a starting point. Another point is we have a lot to learn from poor communities about how communities work, about how people care for each other, and the attitude that we need to teach people how to do things better, I think needs to come with an attitude. We need to learn how to do a lot of things better. I worry sometimes financial services is an area that's ripe for exploitation because of the scarcity issues. You can take advantage of people's propensity to overborrow in times of need and get themselves into debt traps, and as long as you put in a high enough rate for bad debt, you can make a lot of money doing that. At what point do we start teaching leaders of companies to start acting like they live in a community where the people that they're transacting with are people of the same world that they live in, and whether or not those people do better, it's not just the bottom line of the company that matters, it's whether they're helping build a better community for all of us.
I completely agree, and I'm Howard Schultz. It's a big announcement this week around paying for college for all Starbucks employees. I think increasingly businesses, I hope, are realizing they are part of a community, and it's in their interest to take the long view. I guess I just meant to say that it's not any one organization's responsibility, and I think microfinance, what's been so exciting about it is it started as this incredible model where people, where loan officers are engaging with communities face to face every 2 weeks or every month, and because they were doing that, you could not only offer them financial services, but all sorts of other advice and other products, and it became kind of the rails on which things were delivered to communities who, been pretty marginalized for centuries before. My concern is that as things get less kind of high touch, that the expectation is going to be the same, that we're making a trade-off in some cases, that technology-enabled business models are lowering the cost so much and enabling scale, but that also comes with the less opportunity for them to be interacting face-to-face in the same way. And so that's, I guess, my point, is that as we go digital, as things become a little more low touch, that it's then incumbent on governments and schools and civil society and others to think about this issue of training and education beyond what the microfinance institution or the bank or the mobile operator themselves alone can do.
We can take one more question from the audience, and then I think I'd like for the panel to have some closing thoughts. So we need to wrap up by 4:45 sharp. So if there's one more question.
Hi, my name is Marcella Willett, and I work with NetHope. And I'm excited to read the report. I haven't read it yet, but it's been really interesting to hear from all of you and the different perspectives. I wanted to talk a little more, again, going on to the technology and digital finance, mobile financial services track. Microfinance institutions have had this great connection with people in the communities, but have also struggled to really scale up because of the cost. And now with mobile technology, there's a potential to adopt digital payments in such a way that they could continue to have the interaction, but still scale up for transactions only. And I haven't really seen a lot of uptake by a lot of MFIs around the world. And I wonder, is that because the infrastructure in the market doesn't exist? or what are the sort of the barriers for MFIs, do you think, in terms of adopting mobile money and digital financial services to enhance their ability to really scale up?
Sadna, I don't know if you want to talk, or you know much from BRAC's experience with Bcash.
So part of this, I think, I mean, if you look at the early movers, like M-Pesa, and if you sort of compare that with other contexts, like in Bangladesh, where we're just now rolling out Bcash, you know, there was, I think, a bit of an early mover advantage in terms of some legislative changes in the environment that allowed M-Pesa to permeate. In terms of BRAC's experience now, we are sort of seeing incremental, but I think significant uptick in onboarding Bcash onto as a payment interface for several of the programs that we're working with. And I think the next round of sort of innovation around graduation pilots really will have to do with whether we're able to sort of tweak the model, tweak the engagement, and then the actual physical resources, the financial resources that go into cash distributions, transporting large amounts of money, building in transparency into those transactions to sort of prevent fraud. If we can start to sort of eke out those elements of the model using some of these innovations, and so those are some of the pilots that we're hopefully going to be mobilizing the resources around doing over the next 2 to 3 years. And we find that in our work to advise other organizations who are in markets where you have some of those platforms that are a little bit more readily available, the entire model is different, and the economics of the model are completely different. And we're looking at because our model prices in or factors in a physical asset transfer, we're actually looking at packaging the phones with the asset transfer. So if the asset is a livestock package, it's a livestock package plus a phone and a SIM card, which will allow that cash distribution to come directly to you, then you can cash through an agent. So these are some of the innovations that we're looking at.
And one of the challenges there is on the payment side, it's easy to see, for the client to see the advantage of not having to wait for the money to come and follow a tortuous route to get there. On the savings side, a client has to trust the phone and that system, and the money disappears, and is it going to be there when I want it versus the money in the mattress I know is still there. So it's finding out how to build experiences so that clients will understand how they can use these products and find them. Right now, I don't think clients find them products beyond payments to be that much better than the alternative that they have that they're willing to switch. I think when we develop products that are clearly better, then there's going to be movement in that direction.
There's also still a question of the personal contact, with the client too. And I remember there's a bank in the Philippines that tested sending out text messages to its loan clients to try to get them to remind them to make repayments. And these were just a standard text message once a month when their payment was due, and they had an effect, but only when the text message included the name of the loan officer, and only with people who had a prior experience with the bank itself. So the human connection is still pretty important. Yeah.
So I have 10 minutes, and I have one common question to all of you. And sorry, this wasn't discussed ahead of time, but I'm just going back to the theme of the report, which is resilience. And Larry talked about resilience in the context of the households and the poor families. I want to take it a level higher and look at the multiple set of actors that play a part in the microfinance financial inclusion ecosystem. And part of the challenge, if you look at these graphs in terms of growth in microfinance, etc., there was a shock in 2010, and the system kind of reacted to it, is recovering. But what do we need to make this ecosystem more resilient to be able to promote resilience at the level of the household? So, one thing that you can think of as an opportunity moving forward to meet this challenge of 0 by 2030. Whoever wants to take it first.
Okay, I'll start off. Some of the research that's been done on the individual level is resilience is based in large parts by the strength of your networks. So not only the size, but the breadth. How many people different from you do you know? So it's sort of the thin band that is the description of the sort of network. Do you have connections with people who are unlike you and maybe aren't affected in the same way you are, that you can go to for help, or who have knowledge that you would need? I think for microfinance institutions, it's the same thing. We need to build networks outside of microfinance. So with governments, with payment providers, with technology providers, with entrepreneurs and venture capitalists, different ways of thinking about this, so that when a shock happens, there's the ability to adapt by learning and finding ways to adjust. But that's going to take knowing more than just microfinance.
As someone who's tangentially involved in starting up new research projects, it's easy to see who's interested in sort of taking a look at the sector, and it's very different parties. You have corporate foundations that are now looking at the space. You have large corporate banks, tiny MFIs, and there's a huge amount of interest from a lot of parties. So to the extent that results can be shared and publicized and put in a common language, as it were, that's going to, and to take a step back from that, asking smart questions about how these products are actually impacting people, and understanding that is going to help people design better products in the future, share information, and become more resilient as institutions.
Yeah, I guess the way that I look at it, and this was sort of partly going to be a question that I was going to direct at Larry, and so maybe chime in after this, but in terms of sort of resilient systems, I think, sort of some of these shocks aside, we have generally found market-based systems to be resilient, at least more resilient than donor-financed systems, and that's really part of the reason why microcredit and microfinance had legs, because it was a sustainable avenue to create outcomes for the poorest. I think we're maybe now, part of what the report is trying to show us is that maybe microfinance has sort of reached a low point. And I don't mean that in a controversial way of impact or outcomes or reputation. I mean that in a place of perhaps we have reached how low can we go in terms of reaching communities in extreme poverty through sustainable microfinance interventions. And so now I think the question about building resilience in the overall ecosystem is about trying to figure out how do we crowd in the kind of actors and crowd in the kind of stakeholders who are focused on integrated approaches to building resilient outcomes at the household level, and that will actually see resilience for the system overall. And key to that, I think, is trying to figure out how to create market-making avenues within that realm. And I think digital is one of those fantastic opportunities, as is some of the value chain related work that the livelihoods, development, livelihood-related work that comes out of some of these interventions that nonprofits and microfinance institutions are innovating at the ground level. So I think somehow the answer to the resilience question is really, in many ways, it's getting away from sort of this bifurcated, we do microfinance and we do health and we do this and we do that, and really thinking through, yes, to one of the points raised earlier, not every organization can be BRAC, but I think one of the strengths of the methodology that we've innovated here is that we see organizations with an operating budget of less than $1 million have substantial outcomes with a model and approach that really looks at crowding in different kinds of interventions, and it doesn't necessarily all have to be done in-house. And I think part of the solution is moving away from sort of what the market tells us to do, which is to innovate and specialize and focus on the one-thingism that we do. It's really not a one-thing solution. These are complex problems, they're nuanced problems, and they require sort of integrated, holistic solutions that will require crowding in players, and that will build the resilience of the movement.
So I tend to think you do good by what you're measured by, and so it was interesting to see that the Philippines institutions had this uptick in reaching the poorest when they started measuring differently and more accurately. So, I suppose if I could, create a wish list of what the global community does, high on that list would be something around policymakers having some requirements around measurement. And I don't think it's so much in the donor's court as it used to be, but increasingly, because there are more commercial players, it's probably in the hands of central bank governors. And so to the extent we have clearer information around the trends, I think that would make a huge difference. And I would just, make the one point that with the Sustainable Development Goals and governments doubling down on extreme poverty, now's the opportunity to really showcase where financial protection fits in to that larger agenda. And I do think there has been somewhat of a reputation hit and a kind of people get excited about new fads in development. So this is a community that probably could rise up and kind of remind everyone about the really, really critical role of financial inclusion.
Thank you so much. Any closing thoughts, Larry, as the author of the report, and also if you want to say anything about the upcoming summit?
Well, I like your point on measurement, and I think sort of ultimately what we need to do is keep measuring who's still excluded, who's not in this system, and what can we do to help bring them in, and then measuring changes over time so we know whether things are working or not, which is what IPA does a very good job of showing. But we also need good interim, lower cost methods that institutions can use just to track their own progress and improve their products. Moving forward, it's going to take lots of organizations, both from the commercial level and the government and private institutions, civil society, working together and making commitments. And so our summit in Mexico is going to feature that. So September 3 to 5, Mérida, Mexico, Generation Next, Innovations in Microfinance. And we'll hope to see you all there.
Thank you, everyone, for participating. Okay, Sabina has a couple of announcements, but that's it from the panel.
So, in addition to what Larry said about the summit, it actually kicks off with an official pre-summit event that our host partner Pronafin is hosting. It's their national microfinance conference, their Mexican National Microfinance Conference. And if you register before June 30th, you get the early bird registration, save a little bit of money, and also you can see the summit website is 17microcredit.org. We earlier today for RSVPing. If you wanted to purchase a hard copy, we've got them for sale here, check or credit card, $12.95. Get that rate before June 30th, goes up $2. And then we're doing an e-workshop webinar on the PPI, the Progress Out of Poverty Index, on Tuesday, the 24th, called Instilling Confidence in Poverty Measurement, the New PPI Certification. Jessie Marson, our Research and Operations Manager, will be moderating the webinar with Frank Ballard from Grameen Foundation, Annalie Oda from Planet Rating, and Chiara Pescatori from Ecofinanza Rating. That's at 10 a.m. on the 24th. Online information is on our blog, 100millionideas.org. And if you are on our mailing list, you will be hearing about that, of course, tomorrow, or later today, or this morning, or whenever it went out. So if you guys have any questions, you can get in touch with us about these events at info@microcreditsummit.org, or we can give you our card. Thank you all very much.